So if we do get any public comment cards, I guess it's back to you, Wayne.
You got it.
All right. With that, we'll go ahead and go straight into the first item, the update on the implementation of Rule 1180, the refining the fence line and community air monitoring. Jason Lowe.
Hi, good morning, members of the committee. It's my pleasure to provide an update on the Rule 1180 implementation. So just a reminder of what the goals and objectives were for Rule 1180. The first objective was to be able to have a monitoring network at the fence line for all the different refineries to establish a real-time and network around the fence line for different pollutants, both criteria and also air toxics, and also to provide a fee to establish a community air monitoring network. This was to provide communities with information on air pollution levels at the refinery boundaries. So to get into detail about the fence line air monitoring, the fence line air monitoring was to be conducted by the refineries. It was to be consistent with a published guideline to kind of go over the specific monitoring objectives of the fence line air monitoring and to go over some of the elements that should be included with those plans. The system was to provide real-time air quality information, which would be linked to a notification, and then also to be able to provide this air pollution information on a dedicated website. So the participating refineries are located on the map. There's the 6 major refineries of Chevron and El Segundo, Torrance Refining Company, Tesoro and Carson, and Phillips 66 and Carson and Wilmington, and Valero. So to kind of go briefly over the Rule 1180 implementation timeline, the board passed the rule in December of 2017. And in August of 2018, the submittal of the refinery air monitoring plans was conducted to SCAQMD staff for review. After that initial review and a little bit of work, the plans were then released to the public for public commentary in December. The rule stated that 2 weeks for public commentary were given, but we extended that public comment period to be roughly 5 weeks. In January, we closed the period for public commentary. Valero's plan was a little bit on a slightly later schedule, so their comments were closed on the February 6th. Lastly, just recently, partial approval letters, and I'll explain that in more detail later. Partial approval letters were issued by SCAQMD, by Wayne. And lastly, by January 2020, we're going to be going through the full approval process, and we also are trying to be consistent and cognizant that January 2020 is the deadline for AB 1647, which requires also refinery fence line monitoring to be up. So just to kind of give an overview of the plan requirements, the fence line monitoring plans, again, must be consistent with those published guidelines. It's broken down into several sections. Fence line, which is described in red, the data portion, which is explained in blue, and the quality assurance or quality control, which is indicated in black. The fence line portions include elements such as fence line coverage, basically how much of the refinery border is covered by air monitoring. Another aspect is proximity to nearby communities and sensitive receptors. So basically how far away lots of population would be living and doing their activities. Meteorology, so we can go ahead and give more context to the air monitoring data. And then the description of refinery emissions and some dispersion modeling to fill in the gaps for the monitoring. And then lastly, looking at the analysis of neighboring emission sources so we can kind of tease out what sources of, what levels of pollution are attributed to refineries versus potentially other sources of pollution such as traffic or other types of pollution sources. As far as the data, again, mentioned that we need to have the data in real time presented to the public, and part of that is to try to provide contextual information so the public can understand it, get input to develop that so when people look at the data, they understand what the data means. And then if there are levels that are high enough to warrant concern, that stakeholders are notified. The quality assurance and quality control aspect deals with making sure that data meets these specifications for establishing the levels and making sure the data is good enough for all of these purposes. So to kind of go more detail on the plan review and approval process, We've had some ongoing discussion to improve the air monitoring plan since the initial submission. Staff has been working with the refineries, both in person, conducting some site visits in some cases, and then having teleconferences and in-person meetings to kind of discuss the elements of those plans. So after it got to a point of submittal and working with staff and incorporating public comment, partial approval letters were then given to the refineries, and this is for the fence line elements. So this is more the technical basis to make sure that there's enough coverage, and also that the equipment and the methods around it are meeting a certain agreement. Just to note, the approved fence line cover, the partial approved fence line coverage is greatly improved from the plans initially released for public review, and I'll get to that in more detail in the presentation. And staff will continue working with the refineries on data presentation, notification, and quality assurance, and elements of plans which are absent from this initial submission. So kind of go into the specific elements. So a picture's worth 1,000 words. So to kind of show the coverage, it's best to kind of show each of the refineries in a given coverage. So what's in yellow is the fence line or border of each refinery, and this is the Chevron El Segundo refinery. What's in red, or the hashed red, is the open path, so basically where the certain monitors can look for air pollutants across, and then there are certain dots, the blue dots, to where those specific monitors are located. We also have H2S and black carbon, which are looking at a single point. So there are several of those located throughout the different points of the refinery to establish those measurements. For the Torrance refinery, you can see the coverage is pretty much complete. And when you look at the path lengths in red versus the boundary in yellow, and there we have 6 stations with hydrogen sulfide and black carbon. To note, Torrance also has hydrogen fluoride, which is for the refineries that do have hydrogen fluoride. They must measure on all perimeters. So all the optical paths, which are in red, do measure for hydrogen fluoride. For Phillips 66 Carson, this is the diagram located there, and we have 3 point monitors for hydrogen sulfide and black carbon, and the coverage is also pretty complete. For Phillips 66, they are opting to use a demonstration, which is optical tent. So when you look at this diagram, in addition to some of the red path, which will establish the fence line, the optical tent is basically, you can think of it as a sprinkler system that rotates around to look at different points over the refinery. And those path lengths are established in that kind of pink color. So the optical tent will cover over those specific locations. But as far as the data reporting, per the requirements of the rule, the data that will be public will be along the fence line. The remaining portion of the data would be available for staff to review. And again, this is a demonstration project for the optical tent. And this was part of MATES 5, and also will lead into this monitoring for this purpose. The other aspect is that there's 4 stations for hydrogen sulfide and black carbon for this refinery. When we look at Tesoro Carson and Wilmington, we treated them as one entity. So in total, they have 7 stations with hydrogen sulfide and black carbon, and they've got kind of a unique design where they've got 2 refineries separated by the freeway and also a tank farm. So each of the different refining paths to ensure kind of that closure around those sources were installed. This is for Valero. They also have 4 stations with hydrogen sulfide and black carbon point monitors, and their path is mostly complete. There's a small gap on the southwest, but I think staff feels that that this fence line coverage is adequate for this refinery. And hydrogen fluoride is measured again on those path lengths. So to kind of get more detail on the public comments, just wanted to indicate that we received 88 comments from different organizations, stakeholders, include community organizations, government organizations such as California Air Resources Board, and also the different businesses. The comments have been reviewed and considered, and they are in the process, the finalized process. We're getting them posted. At this point, they should either be posted right now or within the next few minutes. So you'll be able to review the full comments and the full summary and responses to those comments online. So some of the overview of the comments, specifically our fence line, the questions were with regards to adequate fence line coverage. The term adequate, meaning that do we completely surround the refinery? And staff has worked with each of the refineries to ensure that staff believes that the coverage is adequate to cover them all. The other aspect is the concept of are the path lengths, using fixed instrumentation rather than rotating optics for the monitors. And what that means is sometimes you have a monitor that can look directly along that path length 100% of the time. And what's being proposed is being able to use a system that can rotate between two path lengths. So essentially they can use one piece of equipment to look effectively at a longer range. And it flips back and forth in a matter of seconds. So we believe that the time for the switch is adequate for a time resolution to be able to capture pollutants in the manner that's appropriate for this program. The other aspect is the path length of those monitors, because the longer the path length, the less detection capability the particular monitor has. So we want to make sure that we have a comfortable path length that we think that can still get the adequate detection capability. So staff recommended that 500 meters was the adequate distance. There are some exceptions that had been made given some constraints that the refinery had for looking at that kind of straight line pathway that would be required for this piece of equipment. However, we do have a follow-up provision that if these path lengths are allowed 700 meters, however, if they don't meet the detection capability that we're expecting off of this measurement, then the refinery will have to go back and figure out how to get the detection capability that's required along those path lengths. The last question with regards to fence line is to increase the number of hydrogen sulfide and black carbon monitors around the perimeter. And each of the refineries, since the initial public plan, have increased those two monitors along the fence line. So we have some comments on data reporting, and some of the guidelines indicate that we display online in a visual, useful, and understandable manner. So we'll be working with several stakeholders to be able to make sure that we can present that data, including the community, to be able to present that data in an understandable manner, work with the refineries on that communication message, and also visualization message. The other aspect is the idea of time. So how fast can this data be, or what time resolution can this data be displayed? So there's different types of data where you parse it out in 5-minute, 1 hour, 8 hour, 24-hour averages. And I think we've committed to displaying it in different types of averages to be reflective of certain health standards, working with the California State Office of WEHA and Public Health and other public agencies, to make sure that we have some meaningful metrics for the data representation. And then also, we want to make sure we have some time resolution. So if something is happening nearby the refinery, then people can look at the data and see that data in real time. And that brings up data notification. So looking at thresholds is very important to the community. So trying to establish, working with those thresholds for notification, linking again back to that health information from what we derive to determine good thresholds for notification to the public or SCAQMD and other interested stakeholders. Some aspects too is to make sure that we have a common message, because if we have refineries, the different refineries with different messages along with SCAQMD with different data messages, that would not be good for public consumption. So we will be working with the refineries on having some consistent messaging and making sure that we can kind of harmonize that messaging. So when the public goes looking for data messaging, it's relatively consistent between the information sources. So when we look at quality assurance and quality control, there's some questions that, some of those methods and some of those documentation, like standard operational procedures, are currently missing. So that's why we go to this partial approval. So the next step would be that these documentation for the actual procedural elements and the certain backup provisions would be laid out and approved before the full approval is of these plans. So the next steps are looking to the community monitoring portion, we intend on having a couple of community meetings to kind of kick off our ideas for the community monitoring portion. As mentioned as part of the rule, the fees are being collected for community air monitoring, and at this point, South Coast AQMD will be doing that air monitoring. So we will be looking to the community for input on that type of community monitoring, like where it's located, types of technology, et cetera. The other aspect is to then implement based upon the feedback we receive, to go ahead and implement those sites by January 2020, and also be able to develop that data portal to be able to present the data to the public. And then going back to the fence line side, going back to the elements that have not been approved, such as the quality assurance, quality control, the data display, and data notification. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Any board members have any questions?
Mr. Chairman, I do have a question. This is Judy.
I have some too.
Okay.
So
Go ahead, Judy.
a couple questions. As you identified certain things that we're measuring, are there some pollutants out there that we are not measuring with this instrumentation, and what would those be?
So the pollutants that are being measured went through the public process of the rule and were identified in the first slide. So there would be some pollutants that may not be measured. I think the primary air toxics and metals and criteria pollutants are covered. There may be some more exotic pollutants, maybe not necessarily expected off of refineries. But I would like to add that, in the kind of refinery areas, 4 of them are covered under AB 617. So pollutants that may not be covered under the 1180 rule, we can go back and look at through the complementary monitoring that would be conducted through AB 617 to be able to cover maybe any bases that would be missed. So maybe not as part of this process, but because we're looking at an overall scope of monitoring programs that can combine, I think we can cover some of those.
And then another question is, each refinery chooses its own instrumentation, I guess, for this. So are we satisfied that there will be consistency among the different refineries on the quality control, what they're measuring, and that we can rely on that?
Yes, so that is a very good question, and that is the heart of the quality assurance and quality control review. Part of the instrumentation that was already selected had to meet a certain performance ability to be able to be even accepted in this plan, because the instruments have already been identified as part of this plan. So staff looked through the technical review to make sure that the instrumentation selected and proposed as part of these plans would meet that expectation.
Okay, thank you. That's all I had right now, Chairman.
Very good. Supervisor Hahn?
Thank you. So part of, I've heard a lot from the community as we've moved forward you've moved forward to grant partial approval of this. Some of the questions that have come to me, number one, you just talked about the equipment. And so they're very concerned about, exactly what type of equipment will be used, particularly for Wilmington and the Torrance refinery. And they really want to see it. They want to know it. There are some experts in those communities that actually want to review the type of equipment that has already been approved. There's also a concern that this is a partial approval. So what part has been approved and what part is still not been approved? So they'd like to know that. Also, the concern is that the monitors, will they be able to detect low enough concentrations of MHF to keep the community safe? Will be able to detect emissions at high enough locations? Let's say the HF doesn't go over the fence undetected and spread on the ground, putting the community in harm's way. So they kind of want to know, is it going to detect low enough? Is it going to detect high enough? What exactly does this equipment, what will it be able to detect? Specifically on these slides about the perimeter for Torrance and Valero, there's some broken lines. So it looks like there's kind of, particularly on the Valero, you can see the dotted line goes all the way around, and then there's this open path. So why is that there? And is that going to provide the level of safety that the community deserves? And again, I'm throwing out a bunch of questions. You can either answer them after I'm done, or if you need to get back to me and answer them, that's
Sure.
good too.
So, but maybe I'll address the question you have so far, and I'm going to go in reverse order since I have the slide up. So, with regards to Valero, you mentioned that there's 2 gaps, and I noted that there's that corner in the northwest. There's a lot of trucking operations that are in there. Staff, in fact, as part of the on-site tour, staff went out to Valero twice to examine this area to see the possibility of being able to establish a path across that line, and also the path across the southwest gap. So staff really explored and to kind of see what was possible there, and it was their assessment that said, you know, there's not really a way for a pathway to go across that specific area. And also I want you to note that the predominant meteorology for that area is coming in from the northwest, so that would be essentially mostly upwind in that gap, and the winds come from the south as the kind of the secondary way of where the meteorology rolls. So, so if you look, we have as far as where the wind would be expected, the downwind direction, those areas are covered completely. So,
I mean, I'm not sure the community would like that explanation in terms of the wind, because, you know, wind changes, and, you know, particularly in different seasons, we know we have winds coming from all over, Santa Ana winds, you know, where Wilmington and Torrance both have ocean breezes, so there's also different kinds of winds. Anyway, I'm not sure they're going to like that answer. And while we're talking about the maps, the Torrance refinery fence line, here's a big concern about this idea of the perimeter fence line. Right in the middle of, there we go. Right in the middle is Crenshaw Boulevard, and it runs directly adjacent to the HMF unit. Do you see where I'm talking about? Look at that big road right in the middle is Torrance Boulevard. Crenshaw Boulevard. Sorry. So the community is very concerned that Crenshaw Boulevard is inside this perimeter fencing, where they're wondering if the monitors would also be necessary along Crenshaw Boulevard, particularly since it runs right next to that unit. And to be honest with you, the reason I'm bringing up Torrance and Wilmington refineries is because they're the only 2, as we know, that use this deadly chemical that, if it escapes, you know, it forms this deadly vapor cloud that, you know, it's flesh eating. So these 2, I feel like they're not going to be happy that there's a gap in Valero, and they're very concerned about Crenshaw Boulevard being right in the middle of the perimeter, and there seems to be no monitors along that line. So that's something they're very concerned about.
So in address to this specific comment, Torrance Refinery, again, Rule 11 focuses on fence line monitoring, but the refinery itself, near some of their sources, have different sensors to be able to look at pollutants. And specifically for HF, there are sensors to look at HF at near the source. So even though the fence line monitoring doesn't depict that specific concern, the overall comprehensive program, when you're looking at the refinery on-site program, the fence line complements that by saying, okay, if there is something, the sensors near that source should detect it, and then the fence line will kind of see if there's any residual HF that would be crossing that border.
I think we could add that there are a number of HF sensors in the alkylation unit. I think there's 4 that are immediately surrounding the unit, and then there's one upwind, there's one downwind. So there's at least 6 that I know of for the HF units. And then there's one, I think, right on Crenshaw.
Hey,
There are a number of HF.
Wayne, sorry, Chairman, one suggestion is maybe could we get a map with those 2 refineries with all of the various sensors that the refiners have, as well as our sensors we're planning on adding, so that we can give the community a better understanding of all the various sensors that are on site?
That's a great idea, Ben. Thank you. Thank you. That's a great idea. And also there's they're concerned about there's another one of those gaps at the Torrance refinery fence line. And so they're also concerned about that. And you'll probably tell me that has the same rationale of the Wilmington one, why there's a gap there.
Yeah, so the Torrance refinery, the predominant wind is coming from the west, and so the backstop would be on the east side of the refinery, which does have full coverage. And just to note, as you said, wind does change. Wind changes all the time. So if there is a release that's headed towards that gap, the wind shift will kind of shift it towards where some of the other paths are. So we should be able to see it if there's a large-scale event due to shifting winds.
Okay. And then did you want to answer the other questions about can it detect the low enough and high enough?
Yes. So the instrumentation that staff looked at can cover both the lower range of HF as well as the high range. So basically it kicks into a different mode that can look at the high range concentration levels to give a value for if there was such a high level that was present in the monitor. And then I think your other question was about what is approved versus what's not approved. So the approved portion is the type of equipment that's been selected, the kind of locations of the different monitors that are on the fence line, and making sure that there's adequate coverage as part of that approval process. So those are the main elements that have been approved.
And that's going to be made public, right? Which part is approved and which part is not approved?
Yes.
Parts per billion. So the full range is that parts per billion level, which is kind of the very low level, and they can go up to basically 1,000 times higher than that, which is in the ppm level for this compound.
The supervisor was asking the parts of the plant that are approved versus not approved. They're on public domain.
So right now, that partial approval, the partial approval letters are online. So basically, what the public can see right now is the plans that were submitted, and then also the partial approval letters that go along with that. And the partial approval letters detail out the elements that were upgraded from the original submitted plans, so the public can see that difference. And as mentioned too, the public responses as well should be online. If not already, they should be online within the next hour or so.
Yeah, because I think even my staff had a little bit difficult time getting public comments and responses. So last comment would be about the next public meetings. There was concern last winter that there was not enough notice about some of these public meetings. And again, given this is so important for so many of our communities, let's make sure we give really good public notice about our spring and fall meetings. And my suggestion would be to hold these public meetings somewhere where the public can actually get there easily.
Yes, agreed. We have the intent on having the community meetings out in the communities that the partners are at. And we will work diligently with our outreach staff to make sure that we can.
Right, and hopefully you work with my office too. So particularly for the communities of Torrance and Wilmington, that I can help with the public notice and the outreach. I would appreciate that.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. Unless we have any other board member comments or questions, we have a public comment on this.
So we have one public comment, Mr. Chairman. Oscar?
Sure.
Oscar Espino Padron.
Just here.
Yeah.
Come on up.
Hi, good morning.
Just a second.
Thank you. Hi, good morning. Oscar Espino Padron with Earth Justice. So first and foremost, I just want to acknowledge and appreciate staff's amendments to these plans and sort of in response to the comments that Earth Justice and other groups submitted. But as you know, Supervisor Hahn has noted, there are sort of a number of questions and concerns about these updates, and it's difficult for community members to contribute and sort of be aware of and know the updates without the actual amended plans. And so in addition to the response to comments and other items that will be posted, we hope that staff will also post the revised plans for public review. These are very technical, very detailed plans, and so it would be helpful to actually see what the changes are in the plans. As Supervisor Hahn also noted, one of the things that the community wants is for additional community meetings in the community, at least 30 days notice. And these meetings should be scheduled in coordination with community members. And so we're hoping that for these upcoming spring meetings to hear from staff and to figure out a date and location that works for the community to be able to contribute and provide sort of additional input on these revised plans. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. All right, any other board member questions? Very good. With that, we'll move on to the next item, the compliance update on Rule 1403.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Terrence Mann. I'm the Assistant Deputy Executive Officer for Compliance and Enforcement. Our team thought it would be important to update this committee on a recent advisory notice that we put out for Rule 1403, our asbestos rule. Now, by way of background, Rule 1403 governs asbestos emissions from work practices. So this is not a matter of telling a homeowner, you have insulation in your house, you need to go in there and remove it. This is focused on activities, demolitions and renovations as defined in the rule. I mean, in some, basically what we're talking about, a demolition is relatively straightforward, but renovations would be, removing acoustic ceiling, grading a floor, something on a wall. This can involve work on a facility component, or even out in the community, an underground transite pipe. Now, some quick side notes. It goes without saying that asbestos is one of the most dangerous substances that we regulate. There are not safe exposure limits, and as such, we pay special attention to it, and it is a critical part of our program. Now, another important point is the asbestos arena is very different than many others, in that it's not only a particular company or utility or even governmental agency doing the work. There are often usually third parties as asbestos abatement contractors who go out and do the work. So what that means is all that's required is a miscommunication among these entities, a sick foreperson, something like that, to have a very serious asbestos event. And another point I would simply make is our inspectors, we're not just the last line of defense, we are often the only line of defense when it comes to asbestos. There's not a lattice work of other agencies out there in the field doing this work. It's us. We show up on site. We are often the ones who identify a problem, call departments of public health or hazmat teams, which often leads to evacuations and other things. Now, under Wayne's guidance, we have increased our inspections and other activities in the field, specifically focused on asbestos. And what we have seen is a disturbing level of non-compliance. And a lot of it seems to result from people simply not understanding the current rule. Now, that was confirmed in the rulemaking process, where many of the stakeholders came forward and said, for example, I can't believe that you're now requiring us to do surveys. That requirement has been in place since 1989. And this led to the advisory, and I'll talk about some of the specifics in a moment. But those particular stakeholders included municipalities, governments and agencies, and also even school districts, which was quite concerning. And it's for that reason last month we issued the advisory. Now, it was sent out through multiple email blasts. We sent it to the users of our online web app for asbestos activities. Compliance staff also issued it to building and safety offices across the 4 counties. And then we also forwarded the notice to planning. And because they have a pretty extensive distribution list, I think it's approximately 2,000 email addresses, and we asked them to push it out as well. So it was widely distributed, and we also put it on the website, of course. Now, with respect to the specific content of the advisory, we focused on 3 requirements of the current rule: surveys, notifications, and then removal and cleanup procedures, specifically what are called Procedure 5 or P5 plans for short. And I'll go into more detail on all these. And again, these were some of the original requirements of the rule. They've been in place for approximately 3 decades. Addressing each of them in turn. Surveys. This basically means someone has to go out to this work site, and this person has to have special training. The person has to look at what is being done and identify ACM, asbestos-containing materials. We want to find particular thresholds to see if it fits our rule, first, and second, the condition of that material to see if it's intact or if it's damaged or disturbed. Now, if it's disturbed, that can mean fibers of asbestos in the air that can expose people and lead to some pretty serious health effects. This must be done prior to any work. The only exception to this is renovations of single unit residences, so homes where it's less than 100 square feet being worked on. Now, this is a 10 by 10 area, basically. So it can mean, a little bathroom, or it can mean a small section of a bigger room or area. The survey has to be documented. We need proof of it. And then the person who conducts the survey has to be Cal OSHA certified. It's an extensive level of training, and it's usually going to be a certified asbestos consultant, or CAC. With respect to notifications, these are notifications to us using our website. Now, I cannot underscore how important these notifications are. It's not simply letting the government know you're doing something. Notifications and complaints are often the only way we will know if there is a serious asbestos incident. And so these notifications are critical to our program. Now, again, it has to happen before any work is done, and in 3 areas. So renovations that impact ACM, asbestos-containing material, renovations involving damaged or disturbed ACM, and then all demolitions. Now, again, the exception for that is renovations involving less than 100 square feet of total ACM surface area. This isn't limited just to homes. This is, for example, a valve on a pipe out in the field, to be removed or repaired. Now, there has been a lot of confusion, though, about this exception, because a survey is still required. Again, this may seem like, and I understand this is very technical, it may seem like a technicality, but it's not. This is the only way we're going to know, and that this entity will know if there is going to health risk from damaged asbestos. And so these notifications have to be submitted using the online web app. It's available 7 days a week, 24 hours. Except one day, I believe it's the last Friday of the month, between 6 p.m. and midnight.
And why isn't it available then?
It's for maintenance by IM to download and save information, recover. The third and final point, removal and cleanup. Again, this is focusing on Procedure 5 plans. But as the first bullet makes clear, there are a series of accepted asbestos abatement procedures. A couple of them are listed: total enclosures, we call that, or that is called Procedure 1. Adequate wetting, that's called Procedure 3. That would, for example, that would be the one used out in the field repairing pipe, wet the asbestos so the fibers don't go in there, that kind of thing. Procedure 5, though, is the main area of confusion. It's referred to as the approved alternative. It's used under special circumstances, so unusual jobs, but it really, a damaged or disturbed ACM is when it's most critical. A plan under this part of the rule must be submitted whenever there's damage or disturbed ACM, and it's irrespective of the size of the project. There are no exceptions. This plan must be approved in writing before work can begin. This is something we see from time to time, is that the plan is submitted and the people just go to work. That doesn't give us time to conduct oversight. We want to get there. We want to see, is there a school next door? Are all the proper procedures being followed? Is it being as protective as possible of the community? So in conclusion, if you or your offices are contacted by members of the public or the regulated community, please feel free to direct them to our asbestos hotline or to the email address identified there. I would note that this is not going to be sent off-site. This line is 10 feet away from our asbestos experts, members of our toxics team, a number of them who are present here today. We would love the opportunity to speak with them, because our goal is not to issue violations. Our goal is to help educate the community, help them learn about the rule and follow it, really to protect the public from this very serious health concern. Thank you. And I'm happy to take any questions if anyone has.
You might want to mention the number of more questions.
Have any board member questions first so we have a public comment too?
Just
Go ahead and we'll take the
Mr.
public
Chairman,
comment, Judith.
I'll ask one question. Do
Okay.
do general contractors know about this? Most of them, like if I hire a general contractor to come in and do some work in my house, tear out something, would they know?
They certainly should. At some point in their education, they have been informed of this. Again, it will depend contractor by contractor, but they almost certainly understand that they're not licensed or certified to be removing asbestos.
So their first job is to do the survey, or make sure a survey is done.
Oh, right. They know to bring someone else in. That someone else should come in and do it. So a contractor should be telling you this is asbestos. You should find the right professional.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, but if you don't.
Lucky was swatting at flies and.
Get him lucky.
Thank you for protecting us.
Careful, might have asbestos on it.
Yeah.
Can we go ahead and take the public comment?
We have one public comment here. It's Peter Whittingham, representing
Go
Berry
ahead, Peter.
Utilities Coalition. Peter, oh, there you are.
All right. Thank you, Chairman Benoit and committee members. Peter Whittingham, speaking today on behalf of the Buried Utilities Coalition, which is comprised of several dozen special districts, investor-owned and municipal utilities, and city associations throughout the South Coast Air Basin, who came together to respond specifically to proposed amended Rule 1403. As was shared, actually, Mr. Mann and his team came and met with a group of coalition members last month to share the guidance document and to address a number of the ongoing concerns the various water and wastewater districts and utilities have regarding the proposed rule language. We greatly appreciate district staff's commitment to work with us prior to this matter coming back before this committee and ultimately the governing board for consideration. Without question, utilities have a critical responsibility in protecting public health and safety as part of their essential public service delivery. With that recognition and understanding, the coalition has asked the AQMD to add a buried utilities provision to proposed amended Rule 1403, along with supporting definitions and training requirements. Some critical points that we believe it's essential to continue to share with your committee and the governing board. Water districts employ and contract exclusively with personnel that are trained in the proper handling and disposal of asbestos-containing material, or ACM. We feel it's vital that these training requirements be recognized by the AQMD staff as part of their rulemaking. Water districts in California have never been involved in an accident of public asbestos exposure from buried utility pipe. In large part, this is due to the existing Cal OSHA safety requirements that are strictly followed, consistent with the language found in the March 27 guidance under the Survey Requirement Act section. Of the literally tens of thousands of jobs conducted annually by water districts and utilities, not one has ever given cause or reason to suspect that any asbestos contamination has ever occurred as a result of these agencies' work in this regard. Water districts are specifically under mandate to provide continued water service. The effect of this mandate is that water utilities must prioritize at all times the safety of the water supply and avoid any imminent threat to public safety. With regard to potential asbestos in asphalt, our coalition has yet to see any data that demonstrates that this is an issue for worker or public health, and so we look forward to seeing such data and any related health risk assessment. And finally, we agree complete with AQMD staff's initiative to add a call and go feature to this rule. However, the on-site survey requirement would delay time-critical emergency renovations and disrupt, potentially for an extended period, the provision of water service to thousands of residents and businesses. So again, we look forward to seeing the latest version of the proposed rule language and to working with district staff and the governing board on addressing the coalition's concerns regarding this rule. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. When will we have this coming back to the actual rule language coming back to this committee?
Well, we're still reviewing comments. I mean, today's update was just on the existing program. And I think
Right.
that I would look to Sarah. And Sarah, do we have a sense?
We were still meeting with stakeholders and taking comments and trying to work that into the rule. We just had a meeting last week with some stakeholders, so we're still evaluating that.
So at this point, we don't have a set time. We're still working with the stakeholders, and we will certainly come back before committee before we go out.
Very good. And Sarah, will this be coming back to local government, small business as well? This update or the update for the rule?
If that is the desire, we can certainly bring it back.
Yes, please.
Okay.
All right. Any other board member questions on this item? All right. Thank you very much. With that, we have the 3 written reports that are attached. Do any of the members of the body have any other business? Do we have any general public comment? Nope.
Nope.
Nothing here, yeah, none here.
All right. With that, our next meeting for Station is supposed to be Friday, May 17th, 10:30. Everyone have a great Friday and hopefully a wonderful weekend. Have a good day.
Thank you.